Hello students, how are you? Welcome to week 14 materials for English 3 for Diploma 3, KU32101 with me, Miss Mona Lisa Pasaribu. So we are now in week 14, one more week before our final test. And as you can see over here, the topic for week 14 is about World Wide Web. Okay, and we are going to look at some expressions to give advice in relation to World Wide Web, or you can say www. So let us check the material for this video. Okay, so very quickly, we're going to have a review from last week's material about diagnosis of faults, and then we will look at the objectives of the lesson for this week, and then we will discuss about what is something good about, what do you call a good website, and then the grammar discussion on giving advice using the correct expression, and then we will do some practices. Alright, so we'll start with the first one, which is about the review from last week's material. So last week we were talking about how we diagnose faults. Okay, so imagine yourself as a doctor, but an IT doctor. So you have a patient or customer with an issue or with a problem, and then how would you identify or diagnose the problems from your customer? So for example, it says over here, my laptop works too slowly. So your job is not giving advice yet, because that's what you will do today, but you are going to identify the fault, why it is happening. So why the computer or the laptop works slowly. Okay, so remember, you are not giving the advice yet. Your job is to diagnose the fault based on this error. Okay, so I hope you can give at least 3 diagnoses with different expressions, the one that we have learned from last week's material. Okay, and for this answer, I want you to post your answer in the YouTube comment. Okay, so post this recording. Remember, you are not giving the advice, but only diagnosing the problem, why it happens. Now we will continue to the topic for this week, which is about World Wide Web. Now, when you're remembering World Wide Web, we will suddenly remember about website. Okay, so as a starter, I have some questions over here. What features make a good website? Make a list of key features you may advise. Okay, so for this question, this is actually to warm up, to give you a warm up, to preview what would you call a good website. I'm sure that you have encountered with many websites. Even a day you have opened at least 5 websites in a way. Well, at least 2 maybe, yeah. Campus information system and e-course, or maybe you will use Zimbra, maybe 3. But what do you think a good website is? Maybe you can also give a reference. I think this is an example of a good website because A, B, C, and D. Okay, so please answer this question by yourself. If it is possible, provide the link to the website that you think is a good website. And we will discuss this in the practicum session. Alright, so now we will look at 2 texts related to websites. So the first one is the trust text, and the second one is about map it. Okay, so both of these texts discusses about what is how is it to make a good website. So I want you to have a good read about this 2 texts, and then probably you can also add some information from here to the questions in the warm-up about what do you call as a good website. Okay, so read these 2 texts by yourself and then identify what do you call as a good website. Alright, so now we will move on to the grammar discussion, which is about giving advice. So if last week you are identifying the faults, this week you're going to identify giving the advice towards the faults. Okay, and I'm pretty sure that you have used quite extensively this advices expression, or maybe you're not familiar with these expressions, then we will look at it again. Okay, so the first one is using the models. So using models is very effective in giving advice, because most likely you will do this on your daily communication with your friends. So for example, oh, what happened to my computer? You should do this, or you could do that. Okay, so in giving advices, I think model use is quite common. And then the second one, we can actually use imperatives in terms of giving comments to your friends, to the customers, or to whoever needs the advice for IT. And then you can also use had better. The fourth one, you can give recommendations. So you say, I recommend you to, and you can also give expressions of, it is a good idea to, and then you can say, I suggest. Okay, so here are some ways of giving advices. We are going to look at this one by one. So the first one, if you are using models, so you can use should, or you can also use could, or you can also use must. It really depends on how strong your advices are. Okay, or you can say you have to as well. Yeah, so you can say your navigation system should be based on text-link, or your navigation system have to be based on text-link, or your navigation system must be based on the text-link. Yeah, and this is depending on the level of suggestion that you want to give to the other person. Okay, and then the second one, you can actually use the imperative. So if you want to use the imperative, I think we have discussed this in the first semester, when we talk about the academic life. So when you're discussing about imperative, you start with the verb first when it is positive imperative, and when it is negative imperative, you can start with the word don't or never as the imperative in negative. Okay, so for example, avoid frames whenever possible, or do not change the location of your navigation elements. And then if you want to use avoid with the verb in, then you can add avoid using frames. Okay, so if you follow, if after the imperative it is followed by verb, then it must be in the form of verb in. Okay, now we continue to the use of had better. So if you want to use had better, it's actually has a closer meaning to a warning. So it indicates something unpleasant will happen if the advice is not taken. Okay, so for example, if you're committed to using frames on your website, you better commit yourself to extra work. Okay, so these are an example of the use of had better. So there is if you don't do it, there will be something not very nice happening. Okay, and then the next one, you can use I recommend, or you can also use it is a good idea. Okay, so these are some ways of giving the advices, and I think this is something that is not very new, and of course there are many other ways of giving advices, but these are some ways that I mentioned to you. Alright, and now just a quick note, everyone. So if you want to make the advice more persuasive, you can also add the reasons to your advice. So for example, you can say it is a good idea to visit a few larger sites to get some ideas on designing the effective site map. Okay, so you give the advice, but also you give the reason why people need to do the advice, and that would make it more persuasive to be done by other people. So as a quick exercise over here, what I want you to do, so in the review, I actually asked you to identify 3 diagnoses of the fault from the issue, from the problem. Okay, my laptop works slowly. So I have a look over here. Let's say your diagnosis is, it sounds like the internal memory in your laptop is running low. So you give suggestion, or you give advice, you had better upgrade the internal memory of your laptop. Of course, this advice would work with this diagnosis. So one advice will work with according to the diagnosis found. Okay, and so therefore we don't really have the same advices for each problem. It really depends on what the diagnosis is. Okay, so have a look at your diagnosis again in the first activity, in the warm-up, in the review activity, and then after that give one advice towards that, and don't forget to use the expressions that we have just discussed earlier. Now, as the practice one, I want you to give the faults and also give the advice. So this is actually the continuation from last week's activity. So last week, when you identify this, the faults, for example, for number one, my laser printer produces very faint copies. So for this, many of you actually said that it looks like, or it sounds like your printer is running out of ink. Okay, and then with that, what kind of advice would you give? Okay, so you can say you should refill your ink, something like that. Or if you have a different diagnosis, let's say for example, my laser printer produces very faint copies. It looks like your print head is not responding well. So the advice is, I suggest you to clean the printer head. Okay, so in giving the advice, it really depends on the diagnosis. Okay, so you cannot give the same advice with different diagnoses. And so what I want you to do for this first practice, I want you to give one fault, give that one diagnosis of the fault and give the advice to that fault for each of these practices question. And then the second one, I also would like you to give advice in order for someone not to get his or her computer hacked. And then for the last activity, because we are talking about World Wide Web and how to call a website a good website, then what I want you to do is I want you to look at one web page. So it can be any web page. In the next slide, I give you one example of a website of Itadel. What I want you to do, I want you to identify and analyze in terms of the usability, the efficiency, learnability, safety, memorability, the consistency, and the information sent based on the website that you are looking at. Okay. If you want to look at the other website, of course you can. And if you also want to show the what you call as a good website, you are also most welcome to let us know. Okay, let us know and identify, tell your identification or your analysis during our practicum session later on. Okay, so this is the example of the website of Dell Institute of Technology. So if you can see, this is the address. Okay, so you can always have analysis. You can also analyze a different web page. It really depends on which you like best. Okay. And for assignment 2, I'm going to discuss this with you more in the practicum session, but it will be in the form of quiz in e-course session later. I will inform to you in the practicum session. So next week is our last week, and our last week will be discussing about the review from week 1 until week 14, and it will be a wrap-up activity just to review everything that we have learned over the semester. Okay, and here are the references for today's activity, and that will bring me to the end of my material today. Thank you very much for watching this video, everyone. If you have questions, let me know, and I hope everybody prepare for the activities that we have discussed earlier. Okay, so it's easier for us to discuss it in the practicum session. Thank you very much for watching this video, and see you all in the practicum session. Bye.